Morning, everybody. I thought it was pretty cool. I was standing backstage both hours, and I couldn't hear everything Keith said, which is often good, just to be part of what Keith says, not to hear all of it. Sometimes I'd get quiet, and then everybody would laugh, and I'd think, he's making fun of me? What's he saying? I don't know. Anyway, so I was listening, and there's just a lot of really pretty powerful things when you think about a year all together. I know the impact that one lady in a survival program, we met her when I was in Ecuador, what one lady's life change happens from there. And we have 15 plus another few that are getting ready to have babies. Just massive amounts of impact because of you guys. We're the only ones doing that. It's all completely on you responsible-wise. And the impact we're making at White Mills, and the impact we're making through IDES, and the impact we're making through the Well in those schools where kids depend on those food. So none of that's about us or you or me. It's all praise to God. But would you just help me and give God thanks for all of that? I think it's pretty cool to be used, be a part of that. Stuff we couldn't do on our own, but together, with God's help, we were able to do some really cool things. I also wanted to draw your attention to the papers there in your seat. This is a new thing we're going to try a few times and see if it's helpful or not. It's designed to be something you can put on a refrigerator or on the side of your monitor or your desk or whatever. On one side, it has a bunch of events coming up, and this is not only for you to be aware of the events coming up, which would be great, but you may know of some things you could invite people to. So if you have somebody who's really intrigued that our church helps jetpacks or those kind of things, invite them to come pack jetpacks with you. That'd be great. There's other events that they could be part of if you have friends that you're trying to pray for and help connect to God. This would be great. February 8th, it's men's breakfast. Almost every man likes to eat breakfast. So, that'd be great. An invite there. All kinds of great things. Summer event registration happening. Great things for kids. Kids that aren't going to be at camp. You can invite them. Great things there. You can click on the sign up QR code and sign up for any of those things. And then on the other side is the sermon series that's coming up. And we're going to try to be a little more out front on that so you know what those things are. This series specifically is kind of geared around family. It's not exclusively family, but what does a fresh start in your family look like with the new year? And so the titles of the messages, I pulled those straight out of the scripture. It's a little hard to necessarily know what those even are. We'll get into that more as we get into the series, but you can invite people it's a family series. So if you have anybody in your life who has a marriage or an ex or kids or any of those things, this series would be applicable to them, and want to encourage you to invite people to that because they'd probably come if you invited them and sat with them and then, bought them lunch, that kind of thing. So do all of those things. That'd be great. All right, so today we're in the third and final week of our series. We've titled Prayer Opens Doors. And I want to jump right into the passage today because it's a great account. I mean, in this one account, I don't even call it a story because story kind of has in your mind like a fairy tale, this didn't really happen thing. This is an account. This actually really happened. You have difficult challenges. You have struggles. You have things that are praying over and through. You have Christians who are plagued with doubts in this account. You have non-believers who are facing realities of God, and what do you do with that? I think the story has everything except for somebody who gets it all right. That guy's not in this story. There's no perfect people in this story. There's no hero but God in this story. None of the characters are perfect. They're all flawed. They're all very ordinary like us, and yet God uses them to do some really pretty powerful things. So don't allow today's account to fit into the storybook side of your mind. Sometimes we do that with Bible things and put in the story of other fairy tales or Aesop's fables and those kind of things. That's not what this is. And in fact, to help you with that, one of the major characters in the story is a guy we call King Herod, a character from history. You can study him online and those kind of things even this afternoon if you want to. A terrible guy from a religious family. He was Jewish by heritage and his lineage there. We call him a king in this story. That's what he went by. But today we'd call him more of a governor. Like he led a province, a smaller area. He was the king of that. But he was under the larger authority of Rome and power of Rome. So it'd be like Bill Lee is the governor of Tennessee underneath the federal government, that kind of an idea. So in fact, when you're reading through this, to help you get it out of the fairy book story mindset into real life things, maybe think about reading a newspaper article and a governor doing the things that Herod does. If you want to insert Bill Lee's name into that, you can do that. That's up to you. He doesn't sound very much like Bill Lee when you listen to him, but you could do that together if you want to, because I think it's really easy for us to get this. There's some things that are fairly remarkable, and it's easy to take it out of the real life part of our brain and put it into the fiction side of our brain. That's not helpful, okay? Acts chapter 12, verse 1 says, it was about this time that King Herod, a.k.a. Bill Lee, arrested some who belonged to the church, intending to persecute them. He had James, the brother of John, put to death with the sword. That's a nice way of saying he was beheaded. And when he saw that this met with approval among the Jews, he proceeded to seize Peter also. This happened during the festival of unleavened bread. Horrible, by the way. You can read through that and just kind of skip over it like, well, yeah, that's what people do. There's a governor having pastors beheaded because they're pastors. I mean, it's just horrible. It's out of our mind to even think that would happen. And we know exactly when this took place, by the way. This is not just some random date in history. We know this was 44 AD. It was in the springtime, right before Easter, 14 years almost to the day before Jesus' crucifixion and resurrection. We know exactly when this took place. So for perspective, to give an idea of how far this is into the ministry of the church, I want you to consider what happened 14 years ago for us today. So 14 years ago today, or this season, Haiti had a massive earthquake. Some of you remember that story. Obamacare was passed into law. Apple launched the first iPad. And Osama bin Laden was killed, all 14 years ago from now. So 14 years after the resurrection, the church is still in its infancy. That's not long ago. All of this took place. Acts chapter 12, verse 4, the next verse says, after arresting him, he put him in prison, handing him over to be guarded by 4 squads of 4 soldiers each. Herod intended to bring him out for public trial after the Passover. So he kills James, cuts his head off. Everybody gets excited about that. He's going to kill Peter, but doesn't want to do it during the Passover because he's a religious guy. It's sort of ironic, right? So this is really bad. Like, this is not a good look for Peter. The Passover is going to be over in less than 7 days. We don't know exactly where it hit in the festival, but within 7 days, Peter's going to die, and there's really not much of anything they can do about it. Verse 5 says, so Peter was kept in prison during the festival, but the church was earnestly praying to God for him. Now, this is the key verse of the passage, so we're going to skip it for now. We'll come back and look at that in just a minute. Verse 6, the night before Herod was to bring him to trial, so the Passover must have been over, Peter was sleeping between 2 soldiers, bound with 2 chains, and sentries stood guard at the entrance. Suddenly an angel of the Lord appeared, and a light shone in the cell, and he struck Peter on the side and woke him up. That cracks me up, by the way. The angel appears in the room, light everywhere. Peter still dozed off. That just makes me laugh. Anyway, so he strikes Peter on the head. Amy's done that to me a time or two. Strikes him on the head. Quick, get up, he said, and the chains fell off Peter's wrists. Then the angel said to Peter, put on your clothes and sandals, and Peter did so. Wrap your cloak around you and follow me, the angel told him, and Peter followed him out of the prison. You get the picture that Peter's kind of just a zombie at this point, just doing whatever he's told. Peter followed him out of the prison, but he had no idea what the angel was doing, what was really happening. He thought he was seeing a vision or a dream. They passed the first and second guards. Remember, there's 4, 2 on his side, 2 guarding. He passed those 2, came to the iron gate leading to the city, and it opened for them by itself miraculously, and they went through it. And when they had walked the length of one street, suddenly the angel left him, and then Peter came to himself and said, now I know without a doubt that the Lord has sent his angel and rescued me from Herod's clutches and from everything the Jewish people were hoping would happen. By the way, if you're reading this and you have like a little skeptical tingle going on in the back of your neck or something, that's normal. These are not the kinds of things that normally happen. In fact, Peter was a little surprised by it as well. You can tell none of them were expecting this to happen. So if you're feeling a little skeptical, I believe it happened, but they weren't expecting it either. And it actually cracks me up. The verse we just read there says, Peter says, now I know without a doubt that the Lord has sent his angel to rescue me. But he didn't know it beforehand, which just cracks me up. So like an angel appears to Peter, he's not sure. The angel speaks to Peter, still not sure. Peter's chains miraculously fall off without waking up the guards, still weighing the evidence. The angel leads him past 4 guards out the city gate, opens by itself. I don't know. The angel leaves. Now I know without a doubt, Peter says. This is one of the leaders of the early church. He's kind of a mess. The history of our faith is not wonderful people who had flawless faith. The history of our faith is ordinary people, often responding in ordinary ways to an extraordinary God who is patient and loving and kind with flawed people. That's the story of our faith. In the Bible, that's the story of our faith in our lives. Verse 12, when this had dawned on Peter, Luke's kind of poured it on. When this had dawned on Peter, he went to the house of Mary, the mother of John, who was called Mark, where many people had gathered and were praying. A little trivia, this Mark that Luke mentions here, it's the same Mark that went with Barnabas and Paul on their first missionary journey and then got homesick and turned around and came home. They had a whole fight about him. That's the same Mark. It was the same Mark who wrote the gospel by his name, the Gospel of Mark that we have in our Bibles. This is the same Mark who later traveled to Rome to be a key assistant to Peter and a key assistant to Paul at the end of their life. The same guy. Probably at this point he was a younger man still living at home. Maybe dad was dead. We don't know. He was living with his mom at his mom's house. Verse 13 says, Peter knocked at the outer entrance of the door, and a servant named Rhoda came to answer the door. When she recognized Peter's voice, she was so overjoyed that she ran back without opening the door and exclaimed, Peter is at the door. This is one of the cutest scenes, I think, in all of Scripture. We don't know anything about Rhoda other than right here. We think, based on the words that is used to describe her, that she was a younger girl. I read one commentator that says she's probably 14, 15 years old, something like that. And she's really excited. So excited that when Peter's at the door, she runs in to tell him without opening the door, which is just sort of cute. And then her excitement, you can tell she's kind of amped up, makes the next verses make sense. So here's a 14-year-old girl coming in all excited. If you've never had one of those in your house, you may not understand. Comes in all excited, and they say, you're out of your mind. That makes sense to me, actually. I've had 4 daughters. You're out of your mind. When she kept insisting that it was so, they said, it must be his angel. But all the while, Peter kept on knocking, and so finally they opened the door and saw him, and they were astonished. Do you see what Luke's admitting here? The church is praying that God would get Peter out of jail. So God gets Peter out of jail, and the church in the prayer meeting is astonished. Didn't expect it. Never thought he'd do it. That gets interesting. Put that away in the back of your head. Verse 17, Peter motioned with his hand for them to be quiet, and he described how the Lord had brought him out of prison. Tell James and the other brothers and sisters about this, he said, and then he left for another place. And in the morning, there was no small commotion among the soldiers as to what had become of Peter. Because remember, Herod's a vicious dude. After Herod had a thorough search made for him and did not find him, he cross-examined the guards and ordered that they be executed. Now I want you to step back for just a minute. This is a great account, but step back for just a minute and kind of get a 30,000-foot view. I want you to notice that the church lacked strong faith. And I'm glad Luke was honest about that. Luke, the historian, writing these things down. You know, the church is vulnerable to share that. One of their key leaders gets arrested, and they pray earnestly to God to get him out of jail, and so God does, and they were astonished. They didn't see it coming. They never expected God to do that. The church lacked strong faith. Second, Herod lacked strong faith. Herod's an interesting character. He's a Jewish man by origin, so he knew the Jewish customs. He was raised within that framework, and yet he didn't follow any of the 10 Commandments. He was a horrible man, but he knew all of it, and yet he finds out that Peter is missing, and his thoughts only go to natural things. Either the guards were corrupt or the guards were inept, but he never considered something besides the guards. Now, before you give him a hard time, a lot of Christians do that today. A lot of modern people do that today. They look at things only through natural lenses. They don't consider that maybe God's involved. So somebody has a mass they're worried about, and the doctors are running tests, and they get people to pray because they get this mass. And then the tests come back negative, and they say, ooh, that was lucky. That was a close one. As if maybe God didn't change it. He may have, but we don't even consider that. Like we just got overreacted. Or they have a hard conversation they're going to go through, and they're praying that God would help it go smoothly, and then it does go smoothly, and they go, oh man, it wasn't as bad as I thought. Well, maybe it was going to be worse. before you prayed. You never even considered God's involvement. Herod never considered God. And sometimes Christians don't consider God either. Herod lacked a strong faith. Peter lacked a strong faith. I mean, Peter clearly wasn't expecting God to show up. This is the night before he's going to be arraigned, the night before he's probably going to be beheaded, sound asleep with no expectation of God doing anything. And then I love it that Luke wrote it down. This is one of the key leaders of the church, and Luke writes down this embarrassing tale about him. I mean, today I think about celebrities or politicians who have PR teams to squash these things. Can you imagine what would happen today if Peter, the prominent leader, had this kind of story written down? Like Peter's attorney goes to Luke and says, hey, we're gonna need to clean that up. Like, I don't know what that first draft of your gospel here, we're gonna have to clean that up. And Luke's like, yeah, but that's what happened, right? Well, yeah, that's what happened, but we're going to need to clean that up. We can't put that down for people to read. It never happens. We don't read ever about Peter pressuring Luke to change that or to make him look better. He looks really bad all the way through, and it's never cleaned up. And the reason is, I think Peter was clear, for all his faults, Peter was clear that he's not the hero in this story. God's the hero in this story. Sometimes pastors think they're the hero in the story. I'm not the hero in the story. God's the hero in every story. God's not looking for you to be the hero in your story. He's the hero in every story. Peter doesn't see it because he lacked a strong faith. Here's a new one I hadn't considered till this time. James also lacked strong faith. And you're like, well, James not even in the story. I think that's the point. James is the pastor of the Jerusalem church. His probably other key leader, Peter, was in jail. They're having a prayer meeting to help get Peter out, and James wasn't there. I don't know if he's watching Wheel of Fortune or what, but he's at home. He's not there. Peter comes in and says, oh, by the way, tell old James what happened because he didn't come to our prayer meeting. And now he gets busted for all time. Everybody to read that James wasn't at the prayer meeting. He lacked a strong faith. And lastly, maybe more importantly, God uses deep sleepers, which has been the story of my life, and so I'm grateful. I'm grateful for that. Actually, I want you to look at this list. Outside that last one, that's stupid. But this whole list. I think this is not what the modern church teaches about prayer. I really do think, I've become convicted. I think we've gotten this all wrong. Today's church says you name it and you never doubt and you claim it to be true and God's going to respond based on your flawless faith. Never happens with this bunch. Like that model wouldn't work with them. Or like today's church says, if you don't believe, don't come around, you're going to lower my faith, and don't come around when we're praying because your lower faith is going to mess things up or something. They didn't do that either. I mean, most of them, if maybe not all of them, had a low amount of, outside of that servant, Rhoda, outside of her, I don't know that any of them had much faith. This is not a who's list of faithful giants. This is a collection of ordinary men and women serving an extraordinary God. They're not the hero. God is the hero. I loved a minute ago that Keith talked about the IDES allows the local church to be the hero. The local church is the hero, not because the people in the church, not because the leaders of the church, not because the pastor of the church. The local church is the hero because God is the hero of every story. And yet, Jesus, when he was teaching, asked a pointed rhetorical question, when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on the earth? And I don't know that he will. I mean, I can't speak for everybody. I'm just speaking for my life and those I know. I think if he came back today, too often he might not find faith. In fact, I think even if he came back to today's church, I don't know that he always finds faith. I don't know that a lot of us believe. Let's focus in on one key verse. Verse 5, I skipped it a minute ago. It says, so Peter was kept in prison, but the church was earnestly praying to God for him. That word translated earnestly is the Greek word ekteneos. And it literally means to stretch out or strain. It's an athletic term. Remember, the ancient Olympics started in Greece, so that was in that area, Mediterranean area. And so it's like straining to cross the finish line, striving to get that last inch, that last ounce of energy, complete focus, straining towards the goal. I don't know about you, but I've never thought about prayer like that. Like crying out to God with dependency and expectancy, Not because God is obliged to obey me, not because I have to do this out of guilt or obligation, not because he's my last option, but because he's my best option. He's not my last resort. I don't think of prayer that way, but I think it's a good picture. What I didn't expect when I was searching for images to put in this moment, I Googled image of runners straining to cross the finish line. And a few of the pictures were like this, but the majority of pictures were different. Most of the pictures were more like this. People barely hanging on. They've sprained an ankle, or they've tripped, or they got out of the gate wrong, and now somebody's come along beside them to help them finish the race. And I think this is a truer representation of Acts 12 than the pretty people doing athletic things. This is the history of our church. Clinging to God because he's the only one who can do what we need, the only one who can really fix what's really broken. I think we're too quick. I can't confess for you. Let me take that back. I think I'm too quick to assume that I'm the best option to fix most of my problems. I caused most of my problems, but in my head, I think I'm the best option to fix most of my problems. And I'm not humble enough, just me, I can't speak for you. I'm not humble enough to realize that many of the things that I want the most are not things I can even control. They're out of my hands. I can't fix relationships on my own. I need God's help for that. I can't control life and death on my own. Safety and health and those things, I can't do that. I can't forge a connection to God. I can't manage the volatility of our world. I mean, our world gets more and more volatile. It feels like every year, every decade. I can't control any of that. Prayer must become our first instinct, not our last resort. Prayer must be the thing that we go to on the front end, not right before it all hits the fan. And in fact, I want you to take just a minute, like time out a second on the message. Think a minute about the challenges you're facing right now. The things that come to your mind quickly. That relationship that's difficult, the financial strain, the worry about work, maybe you've got a health thing going on, maybe there's a mental health or anxiety deal. I don't know what it is for each of you, probably different for each one, but we all have major things that we're dealing with every moment, it feels like. And I would suggest to you that most of those things are at least somewhat spiritual in nature, and most of those things are out of your control. You can help with it, you can tweak things, but it's out of your control. And yet those are the things that we must be clinging to God for. And not assuming that we're going to fix it, not assuming that it's in our control or our hands, it's in his. Actually, when I was looking online, I did find a picture of me the last time I worked out, and that was a little disturbing. We don't need to put that up there. Take that guy off. That's hard to look at. Okay, good. All right, so fervent prayer is stretching out to God, maybe from a place of strength, maybe from a place of weakness and desperation, but stretching, it's reaching, it's going for God. I looked at a bunch of translations to try to get the one that maybe was clearest of verse 5, and I actually, honestly, this time landed on the literal Greek as my favorite. I've got a website I can go to that just translates each word, and it makes it kind of a clunky translation, but I think it's really close. This verse in verse 5 says, "Indeed, therefore, Peter was kept in the prison. Prayer, however, was fervent." Now, English Bibles don't translate it that way because that's kind of awkward. It's clunky language. It's not the way we would say it, you know? Like the literal Greek always sounds like Yoda. Like it never doesn't sound like Yoda, and so we don't translate it that way. But the wording here, I think, is so key to me. "Indeed, therefore, Peter was kept in the prison. Prayer, however, was fervent." There's a indeed, however pattern established here. Do you see that? So indeed, you describe what's happening. Indeed, Peter was in prison. And God knew, but they were talking about it. This was really bad. Herod's a terrible man with a lot of power, and he's planning to kill Peter for his political gain. I mean, think about how much the early church would have changed if Peter had been snuffed out that quickly. 14 years after the resurrection. Our lives would be altered because of this man's shortened life. I mean, several books in the Bible, things that happened later on in faith would all be changed because of this decision. Indeed, Peter was in prison, and they're acknowledging that before God. However, prayer was fervent. They're acknowledging, however, that prayer changes things. Prayer opens doors. Prayer creates the opportunity for a however. It doesn't have to stay indeed. there's a however attached because of God. Not because of the prayer, not because of the prayer's words or faith or conviction or flawless approach. It's because of the prayee, the recipient of our prayers. Because God is the hero in this story. God is the hero in every story. And prayer opens doors. You know, we've talked a lot about prayer models in this series, and we're going to continue to do that throughout 2025. Prayer patterns and prompts, things you can use to make your prayer life feel more effective as you're finding things to help guide you through. I think we should add this pattern to the prayer toolbox, if you will. Indeed, however. Indeed, God, this thing is a mess. I'm bringing that to you. I'm describing that vulnerably to you. However, I acknowledge that you're powerful. However, I'm asking you to give me peace. However, I'm asking you to give me, to see me through. However, I trust you, whatever you decide. However, I need you to fix this. Whatever the however might be, God, indeed, I see this. However, I want you to come through for me. I think it's a great pattern for you to add to the list. And I believe it's the way the early church often prayed. We have a great prayer from Paul in 2 Corinthians chapter 1. He says, God has delivered us from such a deadly peril, and he will deliver us again. On him we have set our hope that he will continue to deliver us as you help us by your prayers. This would be a great model for your prayers as well, that verse. Put your specific situation in where he says peril. Paul depended on God. Paul set his hope on God. Paul trusted God to deliver him when he couldn't deliver himself. Now that verse is great on its own. That's a great verse. But when you understand the context of what that peril is, it gives you a little fuller picture, as it often does. So if we go back 2 verses, verse 8 says, we do not want you to be uninformed, brothers and sisters, about the troubles we experienced in the province of Asia on one of their journeys. We were under great pressure, far beyond our ability to endure, so we despaired of life itself. Indeed, we felt we had received the sentence of death, but this happened that we might not rely on ourselves, but on God who raises the dead. The difficulties Paul sees as an opportunity to depend more on God. Now, the specifics that Paul dealt with are different than what we deal with. Our culture is different, our technology is different, our ability to travel and communicate, all different. Lots of differences on the surface. And yet underneath it, the root of what Paul dealt with is almost exactly the root of what we deal with. Just look at the verse. They were under great pressure, far beyond their ability to endure. Now, our life is very different in America today in 2025 than it was then. And yet, as advanced as we are, we have more people who are feeling overwhelmed by pressure than maybe any other country in history. We're one of the leaders in that regard, just as Paul said they were on their trip. It says they despaired of life itself. I mean, America is one among the leaders every year in so many categories. Among them is suicidality. People who get to the end of their rope and say, I don't know that I could do this anymore. For all that's going right with us, there's something profoundly wrong. And I would never do it, but if I were to ask for a show of hands, lots of you understand what it's like to be under pressure far more than you can handle. Lots of you would say either you understand what it feels like to feel suicidal, or you have felt that way in the past, or you may not feel that way now, but you can see that from where you are. You've moved that direction enough to know, I know what that would feel like because I can see that from here. Just like Paul did. And then it says they were facing death. And in this room right now, we have all three. Some are facing medical crises right now that may become fatal potentially. Some are facing mental health crises that could become suicidal. Some are facing immense pressure that's far beyond what they can handle on their own. This is exactly like what our life is like today. And Paul's answer should be ours, to place his hope on the only one who can deliver. We face many of the same struggles and challenges the people did in Paul's day. And I want us to have the same hope that he had, that God will see us through. That prayer opens doors, that it changes things. Let me bottom line this for us, because we've gone a lot of places this morning. Number one, I want to challenge us to pray more. You know, the early church didn't always pray right, but they prayed a lot. And I told First Hour, I don't even know if I agree with what I'm getting ready to say. Theologically, I'm not sure it's correct. But if we're not going to get the quality of prayer right, let's at least shoot for quantity. Let's try to get that offset. Let's at least do one or the other. If we're not going to do it the right way, let's at least do it a lot. I don't even know if I agree with that. I think they did it, though. I think their prayers sometimes were from a place of lack of faith or lack of expectation, and yet they prayed a lot because they were dependent upon God. And I need us to pray more. So if you're somebody who, honestly, if you're just candid with God, you'd say, I don't really pray much at all. I mean, every now and then I'll pray, but really I'm not a praying person. This is not a judgment for me. This is just a challenge for me. I need you to start praying. I need you to do that. Just a little bit. Pray more than you're praying now. Some of you pray some. I want you to start praying a lot. Some of you pray a lot right now, and that means this is probably a natural gift for you. It's a passion for yours. You're a prayer warrior in our midst, and we need you to lead the way by praying even more than you do already. Jesus challenged us to always pray and never give up. And yet if we were to look at our culture right now, there's a lot of Christians who don't always pray and who give up too quickly. And we've got to change that. This year in 2025, we're going to go into other series and other topics, but prayer is going to be underneath the surface all along. And every week we're going to give you a different model, 52 different models of ways you can pray. In fact, 53, because I snuck in a bonus one today with the indeed however thing. But you've got to do it. It's not enough to know how to do it. You've got to do it. Like, I don't know if you're like this or not. I'm convinced that I believe if I were to buy a workout piece of equipment or get a gym membership, it will make me healthier. It doesn't work. I've got to use it, right? Like if I buy a book, I think I'm smarter. I don't have to read it in my head. I'm just owning it makes me smarter. Doesn't work. Knowing how to pray, we've got to do it. You've got to pray. So pray more. Secondly, pray first. Before you get up in the morning and grab the phone and scroll through and look at, like before you do anything, pray first. When you go to drop the kids off at school, pray first. When you go into work, pray first. When you go into that tough meeting or hard conversation, when you have to make a decision, pray first. Whatever you do, before you do it, take a moment and involve God in it and pray first. In 2 Timothy chapter 2, Paul says, I urge you, Timothy, I urge you first, before you do anything else, pray for all people. Ask God to help them, intercede on their behalf, and give thanks for them. I urge you first, before you do other things, to pray. Pray more, pray first, and third, trust most. Trust God most. Trust God more than you trust your instincts. Trust God more than you trust your friends. Trust God more than you trust your bank account or the news cycle or your favorite politician. Trust God most. Because if we did that, if we trusted God more than everything else in our life, if we put him first and trusted him first, we would pray more. If we trusted God more than anything else, we would pray before we did anything else. That would be the first thing we do. And if we did that, we would see God open doors. We just would. I want to end today by getting just a touch personal with you, if that's okay. As we wrap up the message and the series and all of that. So if you weren't with us 2 weeks ago when I started the series, you ought to go back and listen to that. It's on our app or website, those things. It's one of the best 3 messages we've had in the last 3 weeks, so you ought to listen to it. That'd be great. But I mentioned at the start of that message that God woke me up in the middle of the night, as he sometimes does, because I don't listen to him during the day, I guess. And the clear message, like it just felt divine. Like God wanted me to know this one thing was that I'd stopped asking him for stuff. I prayed, I did that, but I wasn't asking him to move the needle. I wasn't asking him to change things. I was just praying that I would do it better or that I would understand better. But I wasn't asking him to do something. It might be the best message you'll ever hear. You should go back and watch. No, it's not. But you should go back and listen to that anyway. That happened like a week before the message. The middle of the night moment was like a week before the message, and the message was 2 weeks ago. So now we're almost to a month. I've tried to do better. I'm not where I need to be yet, but I've done better. I'm being more specific with God. I'm asking God more boldly for things, but I'm not the hero in this story, so don't confuse that. And yet in that month, I've had 3 separate, unrelated moments where I'm convinced that God changed things. Like supernaturally changed things. And some of them were things I wouldn't have noticed had I not been paying attention. Some of them were kind of overt, and they're a little personal, so I can't go into all of that. It would take too long. I don't have enough time for all that. But I'm convinced the core of my being that things were going this way, and I prayed, and God moved it by his own self, and that went that way in direct response to my prayers. And I think, why is God doing that right now? Like, I'm trying to pray differently. I'm trying to pray more. I'm trying to pray more specifically. Maybe that's it. I don't think so. Maybe he's doing it because he likes me, you know? I don't know if you, I sometimes struggle to believe that God likes me. I can easily believe he loves me. I sometimes struggle to believe he likes me. But maybe it's because he likes me. I don't think that's it either. I think he's answering my prayers because he likes you. And he knows I have a big mouth. And so if he does something in my life, I'm going to tell you about it. And if I tell you about it, it's going to increase your faith. And if I tell you about it, you're going to pray more. And if I tell you about it, you're going to have more faith and you're going to pray more. And God's going to open doors in your life. And he wants that for you. So as we start this year, I need you to pray. If this is new to you, I need you to pray. If this is something you've done but gotten out of the habit, I need you to pray more. If you're a prayer warrior, God bless you, pray even more. Lead the way for us because we need you to do that. Our church, here's the thing that gets me. So many Christians today are wringing their hands about this part of culture, or that part of culture, this way this thing's going, or way that thing's going. And I get all of that. And yet I think we're praying less maybe than we've ever prayed. And somebody ought to go, wait a minute, what if those two things are connected? Because I think they are. Things aren't going the way we want them to go spiritually, and we're not praying much about it. And I don't have to speculate because God said, if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face, I will heal their land. And so if our land is not healed, it's got to be because we're not humbling ourselves and praying and seeking his face, and we can change that. We can't change this. We can change this. We have to. Our church needs it. Your family needs it. Our community needs it. I went to TCTC with the students last week, and I did a session for the whole conference, so I saw a lot of students that weren't ours, but then also a lot of our students, and they could submit questions to me. I had like 100 questions I answered, and so many of them were just pastoral. They just need somebody who they trusted to give them a hug. And I couldn't because it was anonymous. I didn't know who it was, but so many students are hurting. They need our prayers. Our culture, our world, our country needs our prayers, and I've got to have you doing that. I've got to have you doing it. I want you to bow your head and let's pray together. Dear God, we come to you in humility, in earnestness, straining and striving for you, God, not because we're the hero of this story, but because you are, and we declare that to be true. So, Lord, I ask for those, especially, God, for those who pray, if they're candid, they just don't really pray much. I pray, God, from a kind place in my heart, no judgment. I just pray you would prompt them to pray. And God, I ask with greed, selfishness maybe, that you would answer those prayers for them, that you would open some doors for them so that they could see that you're real and that you work and that prayer changes things. And God, I pray for those of us who pray, that you'd help us pray more. And I pray for the prayer warriors. I thank you for them, to have them pray even more, to lead the way for us. And God, I pray for our nation and for our community and for our families and our kids who need help, that you would bring healing to our land in response to your people humbling themselves and seeking your face. I'm sorry, God, that we've not sought you first and most, and we commit to change that. In the name of Jesus, amen.